So thank you so much to everyone for joining us on this very warm Tuesday in June. I know that there's a couple of you that have never joined our Let's Chat sessions before. So to you, hello, my name is Stacey Teece and I'm a trust fundraising consultant at Money-Tree Fundraising. And these Let's Chat sessions are really a space for us to think through the real challenges of trust fundraising together. Honest conversation, practical insights, absolutely no pressure. If you want to ask loads of questions, please feel free to do so. If you just want to observe and listen, you are more than welcome to do that too. So this month, we're looking at what to do when the answer is no, how to handle rejection that we get lots as trust fundraisers, or stony silence. We get that too a lot, don't we? How to get feedback and how to keep the door open with a potential funder. As always, your thoughts and questions and experiences are what really bring these sessions together. I am always truly in awe about how sharing you are with everyone and how supportive that you all are. And I think that's really what makes these Let's Chat sessions work. It's so much richer for what you all bring to it rather than just me kind of at the front chatting on. So before I say another word, I want to hear from you. I've put up a couple of options on the screen, but the chat is all yours to let me know how you deal with this, how you feel about this. When a rejection email drops into your inbox, what's your first feeling? Do you feel deflated? I usually do. A little bit frustrated? Absolutely. A sort of resigned, well, here we go again. Absolutely feel that too. Or do you go straight into detective mode? Why did this happen? There's absolutely no wrong answer here. The point of today is that all of these responses and feelings are completely valid. And I think, yeah, we kind of all feel a little bit of everything, don't we, when it comes through? Emma, yeah, absolutely do. Holly bounces between all four of them, depending on my mood. Yep, if this is the kind of fourth or fifth rejection email you have in your inbox on that day, you probably do bounce around a lot of these, don't you? Sarah's a huge detective, also resigned and frustrated with a smile on my face. Is that like a forced smile or an absolute smile, or kind of here we go again? It's a kind of smile. Dell, resigned, it's just part of the job and will happen. Absolutely, on to the next one. That's a really good way of kind of looking at it, isn't it? This is part of the job. This is what is to be expected. And I had one yesterday I felt annoyed to start with, as we were a good match. That's where that frustration comes in, isn't it? You put all that work in, you do all your research, you know you're a good match, you've got a good feeling in your bones about this one, and they come back with a no. Sarah says it often depends on the size of the ask and whether the current funder, yeah, very disappointed if a large bid or it's a current supporter. Absolutely, absolutely. Sarah says maybe, yeah, maybe it's sort of yeah, resigned smile. And then it depends on how much time and effort you spend on the application. Absolutely, yeah, we're getting a lot of those kind of got off in 1 week a couple of weeks ago and just wanted to cry. Fiona, I absolutely feel you on that one. So we all kind of have slightly different reactions, and often it depends on the day, the funder, like we've said, how much work went into it, how much you needed the money, and we're going to unpick some of this today. So here's our plan for the next hour. 7 areas, all connected by one theme. Rejection is inevitable, but how you handle it defines your relationships and your long-term successes. So we're going to look at why rejections happen and why it's not personal. That's really, really important to understand, isn't it? The 6 steps to take when a rejection lands, how to ask for feedback really well, keeping that door open, stewardship after a no, when a funding project isn't going to plan, auditing your pipeline honestly, and building genuine resistance. And we've got time for questions woven throughout the chat today. So please do put your thoughts and feelings and questions on. You are always so helpful to everyone when they ask questions in the chat too. So please continue to do this. I'd much rather this feel like a conversation than me just lecturing you from the front. So let's start with the why, because when a rejection arrives, and I'm particularly bad at this, our brains are remarkably good at turning it into a story about us, about our organization not being good enough, our writing not being strong enough, the project was not worthy enough. It was something that I did to get this rejection. And so often that story just isn't true. Rejection happens for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with you, the quality of your work, the project that you put forward, or your organization. It could be the pot was already spoken for. Someone has done loads of relationship building, they knew one of the trustees, they might have known the settler, that project, that pot was already spoken for. Their priorities shifted and they didn't communicate that outwardly. How many times have we had that before? Sometimes it shifts in our best interest, sometimes it shifts away from what we thought they were going to do, but they hadn't communicated that externally. Maybe someone else applied for exactly the same thing and they had to choose between those two projects, and maybe again that they had already had that relationship with one of the other organizations, they knew the settler, they knew lots of the trustees, or the timing just didn't work, it just wasn't something that they wanted to support for them. But here's the one thing I really want you to remember: you have absolutely no idea who else applied. None. You might have written the best application you've ever written and still didn't get it, because there were 15 other excellent applications for 3 grants and the trust had to make a really tough decision. Maybe it came down to those personal relationships or that timing issue. You might never know. You might never get the feedback to it. You just don't know what you're going up against. And that doesn't make the sting any less real, does it? You've still put in all of that work to get there. But the mindset shift, and this is something I've really had to work on when I started working in trust, from I wasn't good enough, we weren't good enough, to this one just didn't fit now. It just wasn't the right time for it, is really important, because that shift allows you to determine how you're going to respond next, what you're going to do next. Hannah says the reason for our rejection yesterday was higher reserves than other applicants. Absolutely. And as a trust fundraiser, there's very little you can do to influence those higher reserves. You can absolutely have those conversations internally and upwardly, can't you? But actually, how reserves are presented and how those reserves are spent is often nothing in your control as a trust fundraiser. And that's really hard to kind of get past, isn't it? But it also helps you kind of see that sort of it's not my fault, this isn't a personal thing. And that for me was really hard to get past when I first started trust fundraising. Wide-eyed, I'd never done trust fundraising before. Every rejection I got really stung at the beginning. And Ella says, I feel like being ignored and ghosted feels worse than being formally rejected. Absolutely agree. Sometimes you can work with that formal rejection, can't you? There's a little bit of information there, we're going to talk about that later, that you can use. But stony silence can often be worse and really hard to deal with. Although sometimes if it's stony silence, if it's not a big one that I was really relying on, I can kind of put that to my head, and when it comes up to that 6 month sort of looking at my pipeline and looking at those ones that were made 6 months ago, I can kind of go, okay, well, I didn't hear anything from that one, so that that comes off of my sort of pipeline forecast sheet. I can kind of deal with that a little bit better in my head than sometimes the outright kind of, no, you didn't get it. Juliet says it's so challenging and you can really catch you off guard, especially if the relationship was positive with the funder, very much in problem solver mode, deflated following rejections. Absolutely. Sometimes even nice feedback is tough when you still didn't make the cut yet. You've all been there, haven't we, when it says kind of like, we really enjoyed reading about your project is really brilliant, we just couldn't find the money to fundraise for you, to fund you. It's really hard when you've got funding last year, Charlotte says, and placed 80% chance of getting it this year, got rejected from a few trusts. I got a high task as well. Absolutely, because if you've done well the year before, your task gets higher, your target, sorry, gets higher, because you're expecting some of those repeat funders to come back through. And absolutely, like Charlotte says, that can make you feel really stressed about it, which isn't a nice place to be in. So what do I do when rejection lands? Here are 6 things that are absolutely on my checklist. And the first thing I would say is sit with it. Really take yourself off, make yourself a cup of tea, go for a walk, talk to someone, especially if it was one of those really significant asks that you thought that you were a shoe-in with, like Charlotte says, the ones that you thought were an 80% chance with, you've done all the hard work, they're a repeat funder, they're absolutely on your list to go. You need a moment to process that and to think it through and just sit with it, have a cry if you want to. I've cried over some really big applications, particularly where there was people's jobs that were tied up into it. We were coming to the end of some earlier funding, and we were going to lose 2 or 3 roles if we couldn't secure additional funding for them. And those ones are really, really tough when there's other people involved with it, their livelihood is involved with it. So you need time to process that and, give yourself that time to do that. And then look for the learning. We know, like we've said in the chat, not every rejection will come with that feedback, but sometimes there are clues. Were you genuinely meeting all of their criteria? Could you get someone else to review your application with fresh eyes and against the criteria? Even if you don't get that feedback, could you ask them to have a look and go, was I off the mark? Is there any clues that I can get? Can you have a little look with fresh eyes for me? And then step 3 is to go back to the funder. I would always respond graciously, whether I've got a yes or a no. And we're going to spend some time looking at this in a moment. So we'll come back to step 3 in a second. And then for me, step 4 is updating my pipeline, logging in, adjusting my forecast, looking at what the next steps is. This stops me from feeling like the whole world's fallen in, because I can make a plan. I look at what other applications I have out there in that particular field, for that particular project. And are there any up and coming opportunities that there might be that I can go, okay, we didn't get this one, but now I can work on this one. We've got this one already out there in the pipeline that might come off. I feel, 70%, 60% confident on this one. Having a plan always helps me and my anxiety. If I've got something, I know that it's in place. I've got a plan B. That's really important for me. And then step 5 is updating the team. Rejection has a way of sitting quietly in somebody's inbox, doesn't it? While everyone else is still mentally spending that money. And it's about being transparent, being brave sometimes, ripping the plaster off and having that conversation. You are absolutely not letting anyone down. And it's definitely not all on your shoulders just because an application that you were betting on that you thought was going to come off didn't come off. Use the context that you found from updating your pipeline and concentrate on where your next opportunity might be coming from and the things that you've learned from the no that might help you improve that next ask. It's all about that plan, isn't it? When you're going to talk to someone in particular, a plan for yourself so you know what's next, and also a plan for, we didn't get this money, but we've got X, Y, and Z opportunities out there. We've highlighted another 3 or 4 opportunities that we can go for too. And here's the timescale on those. Having that context is really important to make sure nobody panics, especially not you. And then step 6 is keep calm and carry on. We're very good at this, aren't we, as trust fundraisers? One rejection does not define your whole fundraising program or make you a bad trust fundraiser. As we've discussed, there are many, many reasons why your application didn't hit the mark this time, and none of them will be about how good you are at your job. And I think that's the best thing that you can take away from today, is to remind yourself of that those 5, 6, 10 rejections that you've already got this month are absolutely nothing to do with how good you are at being a trust fundraiser. So then going back to that step 3, I think this is one of the areas where I think we sometimes undersell ourselves. Most trust fundraisers I know get a rejection and file it under bad news. We do the 6 steps and we move on. But I think following up thoughtfully is one of the most vulnerable things that you can do to keep that relationship alive. If there really is that chance for you to go back again, apply again, you've really got a good relationship with them already. and you think that that might be another opportunity there. Why don't we do that? Mostly because sometimes it feels really awkward. You know, you've just had a no from them. The last thing that feels natural to do is go back to them straight away. It can seem pushy, but I think a well-crafted response isn't any of those. It's part of that relationship building that we all know is really, really important in trust. So here to me is what a good follow-up does. It thanks them really genuinely and specifically. Thank you so much for looking at my application. I'm sorry to hear that it's a no, but I am you know, very grateful for you for having a look at my application and letting me know. I think that's a real key thing as well, because like we were saying, the silence can absolutely be worse. It can be deafening. So the fact that they took the time out, you know, they may have had 100 applications to go back to, is really important and something you can absolutely say thank you for. Then only if their guidelines allow it, always check that you can ask one or two really specific questions about your application and why it didn't get that funding. Not why did you reject us, because that can leave things open and is really easy to ignore, but is there anything that might strengthen a future application, for example? So I'll share with you a real example. An organisation that I was working with got a rejection from a trust they aligned with really, really strongly. But instead of moving on from that, filing it, you know, in their pipeline, making all those adjustments, doing everything that they needed to do, they sent a really brief, warm reply and asked a really simple question. And it was about their geographical borders, whether they fit within the geographical borders. And the reply from the trust revealed that the trust had quietly narrowed down their geographical footprint and hadn't told anybody. They hadn't spoken about that externally. So it had absolutely nothing to do with the application at all. It had all to do with internal things that had happened with the trust. And the trust didn't say any of this when they rejected, you know, when they sent their rejection email, they just said that they weren't a good fit. So when the organisation went back and dived into, oh, we thought we were a really good fit, thanks so much for looking at it, but here's why we thought we were a good fit, could you tell us why we're not a good fit? It revealed that they changed those geographical borders a little bit. So rather than striking them off and going, oh, that's, you know, that's, I'm never going to reply to them again, we're just not a good fit, you know, they asked the right question and now they can have a reapproach a plan ready. So that relationship was then saved, not lost. They knew exactly what they had to do to put themselves in front of that trust again. They built up a bit of a relationship, started to build that relationship up by responding really graciously and going back and asking a really, really specific a question because they could. And it you know, then there's no guarantee that they're going to say yes next time they apply, but it meant that they, you know, something they spent a lot of time on, something that they researched and something that they thought they were a really good fit for, wasn't completely lost. They could go back to them in the next year. So there's two things I always check: the funder's guidelines on correspondence and then the tone of the rejection that you'd received. So some, as we've said, explicitly say they can't offer feedback. You really have to respect that completely. We all know that, don't we? But many don't say that. So that is absolutely your opportunity to respond really graciously and go back with a really specific ask because you about your application, because you never know where that might lead you. So you've sent that gracious reply, and if guidelines allow, you've asked them those really thoughtful questions or question about fit. So then what? And here's something I want to push back on that I see quite often, which is the instinct to put a trust on a mailing list or send them impact updates as a way of staying in touch rather than making it personal, especially if you haven't ever received a grant from them. That's not stewardship. That can sometimes feel a bit presumptuous and it's very unlikely to move the needle. They don't have that relationship with you. You're just sending them things to try and create that false feeling of a relationship because it feels like you're sending them something. Now, not everyone does this. I have seen this come up quite a few times with organisations that I've worked with. The most powerful thing you can do after a rejection is to think about who you know and to think about a warmer way in. We know from all the discussions we've had over the last couple of months, maybe the last year or so, that those warm relationships are really what do move the needle in trust fundraising at the minute. So think about your trustee networks, think about your ambassador networks, think about your volunteer networks. Do any of your people have a connection into this funder? Because that's going to do more after a rejection than just sending them another application in a year's time. It's taking that step back and going, okay, we are a really good fit for this. It just wasn't our time now. How can I make my next application stronger? And a lot of that is finding that warmer route into them. Trustee who knows one of their trustees, a patron who might have spoken at one of their events, who might be linked into somebody in there. That kind of network mapping is underused and it is genuinely valuable. We often, think about doing the network mapping at the beginning of a relationship. And that's really, really important. But sometimes if we haven't had time to build that relationship, or we thought we were a really good fit, and we've gone straight in with an application, when you've had that rejection, that's another moment where you can pause and go, okay, I know I'm a really good fit. What's the next steps I can take to make this warmer before I put in another application next year? And then beyond that, think about how you can be present in a way that's relevant. So again, not putting them on a mailing list so they get to hear about you, not sending them impact reports so they're hearing about you that way, really ways that you can engage with what they're doing. And LinkedIn is becoming a really, really good way to be able to do this. More and more trusts are using LinkedIn to promote what they're doing, promote when their new rounds of funding open, the organizations that they've been supporting. So if you're not using LinkedIn in that way, it's a really good way to start looking for those warm ways in. And if you're on LinkedIn and you're using it and you're connecting in with people, you'd be surprised at where you might be linked into some of these trusts that you might never have thought of. If you're connected to all of your trustees, say, and they're well connected and they're using it really well to connect, all over the place, then you can instantly see how you might be connected with them and who on your trustee board you might go have a little quiet word in their ear about, oh, I saw that you were connected to such and such in there, and can we have a conversation about your connection with them? Also, if they're publishing something interesting, a strategy document, a new funding priority, a piece of research on their LinkedIn profile, that's a really good place to engage with it. This is a great piece of research. We're really interested in hearing about this at the blah 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 charity. Just getting your name out there and recognised. If you're both at the same conference, have a real conversation, not a pitch, a conversation. Oh, I saw that you're interested in work with children. How are you finding the conference? Talk about the trust, talk about your organization, ask them about their work, show them genuine interest in what they're trying to achieve. So again, they'll go away and they will have your charity name in their mind to go and do some more research on. Same with attending Meet the Funder events where they might be speaking. Ask those thoughtful questions and get your name and the name of your charity out there so that, one, they'll do their own research, and two, they will remember you when your application comes through. Those are really good ways to start building those relationships with people. And if there's a truly relevant reason to make contacts, not one that you've manufactured, one that's genuinely relevant, then do it. Invite them to a project. If there's a project that you're starting to run that you think they're going to be really interested in, but they haven't funded it yet, invite them along to your project to come and hear more and tell them why you think this is a really good fit for what they're doing. Piece of sector news that directly affects you both. I saw this and I'm sharing it with you because I know that this is something that you're interested in at the blah 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 trust. you know, and I'd really like to have a conversation with you about this. What's your thoughts and feelings on this? You know, anything that might open the door for you. It's those kind of little I saw these and thought of you moments, isn't it, that we talk about in our kind of stewardship after we've received a grant. But there's also little things that we can do if we think that we're really, really, really aligned with a trust, but just haven't been able to solicit a gift from them at this point. And then before you consider that reapplication, you know, we often do it in yearly cycles, don't we? So before we come round to that next year, that next time to reapply, ask yourself 2 questions. Has anything changed that genuinely strengthens the fit? If I was to put another application in this year, has anything changed that would make them more likely to for me to have a successful application? And have I found that warmer route into application than a cold submission? If your answer to those is no, then you're probably not ready to submit again. There might be something you need to do a little bit more work on. But if it's yes, that's a really good opportunity to use everything, all that information that you've gathered, all that warming up that you've done, to go in with a much, much warmer application, so you feel like you're in a better place. You still might get rejected. It's just the nature of working in trust fundraising, isn't it? But at least you know you've absolutely done everything that you can do to put yourself in front of that trust. Now, I know, and I've had a lot of feedback about this, that you're all finding it harder to build those relationships with trusts and trustees. What's the barriers that you're coming up against at the moment? I know a lot of people are saying, particularly for unsolicited applications, ones that don't accept them, that those are particularly hard, and that, you know, people aren't answering emails that you're sending and things like that. Is there anything in particular that you're coming up against? That maybe we can have a chat about, if there's any barriers that you're currently facing. Please do drop those in the chat and we can come back to those. And while you're thinking about that, let's talk about when a funding project isn't going to plan, because, and this is kind of different, a little bit different to that kind of rejection, but I think it's really the same skill that comes with graciously handing a rejection. It's also about handling when your project and things aren't going quite to plan, without damaging that relationship that you're building. So sometimes the setback isn't a funder saying no, it's a funded project not going the way that you expected. We know targets can slip. Maybe the number of participants that you thought you get weren't quite where you thought you'd be. Maybe some of the people that you thought your project would attract from specific areas, underrepresented groups, maybe they aren't coming from the areas that you thought that they would be. Maybe a key staff member leaves. It's harder to engage in those communities than you thought it would be, or that costs change. It happens constantly in delivery because there are certain things, particularly external things, that we can't control. We have absolutely no control over these things, particularly as a trust fundraiser, because there's only so much service delivery we can kind of get a little bit hands-on with or have any say in. And I often hear that there's a strong narrative towards staying quiet and hoping it resolves before the final report is due. And for me, that's usually the wrong call. Trusts and foundations are not naive. They have funded dozens or hundreds of projects and have seen plans not survive contact with reality. It's just the way that they are. They aren't naive. They absolutely know the way of the world that these things change. And what erodes that trust with the trust isn't the problem itself. It's finding out about it too late, or finding out about it from your final report rather than finding out about it directly from you. The moment you genuinely know that something's off track, that's the moment to get in touch, usually with the grants officer or the main contact. It's not always necessarily with the trust unless it's a smaller trust and the trustees are very, very heavily involved. Be really specific and really upfront about what's changed. And for me, I'd go with at least the beginning of a solution, and not just drop the problem in their lap, but come with a solution. And sometimes it might be, if the trust has a particular specialism in the field, they might be able to help you come up with a solution, maybe something that you haven't spoken about, and then they'll feel really, really involved with your project, and that you understand where they're coming from, and that you know that you could use their expertise to help you solve the problem. Many funders have more flexibility than people assume on timelines, on revised outputs, sometimes on budget reallocation. I've had to go back sometimes, halfway through a project and say, this project just really isn't working the way that it's structured, and we need to pivot, because actually we're seeing people from this particular group come and use our services, and that isn't what we expect at all. I'd love to talk to you about continuing to use your funds to do this with the project instead, and having that conversation and cluing them in. But it's only if you do that before it becomes an absolute crisis. And I've absolutely seen funder relationships strengthen through those conversations, because the funder comes away feeling like a trusted partner rather than someone who's just writing the check. So sometimes those things that look like they're going to be an absolute disaster and the trustees are going to be interested at all, actually it can make that relationship feel better, that they're involved in those decisions, and that you trust them enough to tell them when things aren't going quite as they planned. So I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat, see where we got to after I asked that question. So there's so many specifically say not to ask for feedback in rejection. I always say thank you for letting me know the outcome, but don't ask for feedback if they've said they don't give it. Absolutely, and that's absolutely the right way to go about it. But even saying that thank you, you'd be surprised at how many organisations don't even send that thank you back. Can put you on their radar if you're intending to apply again. So you're doing absolutely the right thing there. If they don't say that you can ask for feedback, absolutely don't ask for that. From a positive perspective, I find when I'm meeting funders face to face at Meet the Funder events, online sessions, my application success rate is much higher. Absolutely, Hannah. That's a really good example of why doing these small little things that you think aren't going to make a difference absolutely do make a difference, because in a sea of nameless, faceless applications that are coming through, 100, 200 applications at a time, if they recognize your name, recognize your charity name, they've already done a little bit of research about you because something you said has piqued their interest, and they've had a look at your website, it gives you a much stronger chance of being put to the top of the list to even be looked at in some cases if they can't get through that whole pile there. So it is becoming more and more about building those relationships. So that's a really, really positive experience to share. Hannah, thank you so much. So as we have a big project, we need funding at the moment, and I have 4 large applications being considered. I'm sending them all updates monthly to keep our application up to date at every stage. So it's a tricky one, isn't it, when you've got those big applications out there. I think I would only send updates if something had significantly changed in my application, because realistically, funders don't have time to continue to look at all the updates that you're sending them if they've set out how long it's going to take for them to look at, or we know from experience that it can take 6 to 8 months, sometimes a year. I've had applications come back successful after 2 years that I had completely written off. Just watch that you're not spending more time updating an application that could be put into building relationships elsewhere. Just watch that you're not slipping into that too much, because doing it so intently with monthly updates can sometimes make your application do less well. It's just if there are really big changes that the trust needs to know about your application that I would be sending them an update. So just watch that you're not slipping into that with that, Sarah. So another Sarah, I find it hard to think about how much info to send to trusts, particularly small trusts, when they are so oversubscribed, especially when they aren't funding you and have rejected you. If you're one of hundreds they've rejected, won't they just get annoyed if you start sending bits of information? Absolutely. That's why we're not going to start sending them lots of bits of information. We're going to handpick if there's something that really stands out, that is something that's really connected with what they've done, a good piece of sector information around children's welfare, something that you both work in, something that you had a conversation about at a conference. Say, this is why we should be adding them to mailing lists. This is why we shouldn't be sending them monthly updates unless we've already got that relationship with them and they've let you know what they want. It's finding those, like I said, those I saw you and I saw this and thought of you moments. What's a really strong piece of information that you could send them, and you don't have to look for these things on a monthly basis. What can I send them this month? It's just if you come across something and think, oh, they'd really like that from either a conversation I've had, or I know they're really struggling in this sector, I wonder if they've seen this, or do those things on LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be by email. It can be, oh, I've seen they've put something on, or a trustee has put something on there. You can interact with those things. So absolutely don't send them lots and lots of stuff. You're absolutely right, particularly those smaller trusts when they're oversubscribed. They just don't have that time to look at everything you're sending them. This is about hand piecing, creating curating pieces that you can send to them that will just pique their interest about you. And then Hannah says, as an example, the charity had been unsuccessful with a local funder for many years, but I met the funder this year and was able to ask what would have a better chance of success and how to pitch it. And we were then successful. Hannah, that's a brilliant example of why making those relationships, having those conversations, being brave, approaching them at Meet the Funder events, picking up the telephone and having those conversations where you can are really, really important. Emma says, it's tricky for us to make in-person contact being Belfast based, but I try my very best to keep track when folks are visiting here, invite them to relevant events, or when I'm in halls in London, etc. Working man's holiday. Hey, Emma. Absolutely. It's finding those little pieces of connection, isn't it? And it doesn't always have to be face to face. The way that the world works now, we're doing things like this online. If you can invite them for a virtual tour of your project, if you can have a Zoom Teams call with them, you don't have to be physically in person with them anymore to try and make those connections. And again, lots of conferences are now online and have breakout rooms. Lots of Meet the Funders are also online now as well, so you can attend and ask those questions. Trustees are moving with the times, and so there are ways of going around that kind of in person as well. Holly says, I recently discovered we'd been unsuccessful after doing some LinkedIn digging and seeing comments from other organisations saying they'd received their rejection notes. So we've been ghosted. I'm thinking I should still drop the funder a note to say thank you anyway. I think unless the funder's been in touch with you, it's really difficult for you to kind of go back. It might sound a bit petulant to go back and say, thanks for considering our application if you haven't heard anything from them. Again, I would have a look. Do you have those warm ways in that can get you on their kind of, if some people said they had received their rejection notes, maybe they had a closer relationship with them, and so they responded to the ones that they knew a bit more personally, and you maybe don't have that warm connection at the moment. So maybe that's something you could work on and use that time instead to do that. And if there are Meet the Funders, like you said, you've used LinkedIn, if there's some connections through LinkedIn that you could find, maybe that would be a better use of your time in that instinct. Hannah says, maybe you could ask if they've considered your application yet to start a conversation. Again, I'd be really careful about doing things like that with organizations that are really, really oversubscribed. What you don't want to be is start being a pain, isn't it? So if there are maybe more public forums that you can ask that. If they've put something on LinkedIn, maybe that's a more gentle way that you can ask that. If you were supposed to hear by a particular date, then there is absolutely no reason why you can't just send a really friendly sort of, we were hoping to hear by this date, but we haven't heard anything yet. Could you just give us an update? Because we've seen it lots, haven't we, in the sector where organizations have moved their consideration periods and haven't always communicated that outwardly. So it could be that they're still considering it. Absolutely. So, but there are that's maybe something you could do if there was an advertised date out there and you haven't heard by then yet. But again, be really careful about how you're using those opportunities. These are really busy trusts. It's about finding those things that create that connection rather than kind of getting them annoyed because they might feel like you're pestering them. Claire says we have a project that's been delayed due to illness of staff delivering the project. Will therefore not support as many people we had hoped by the end of the grant. How much detail should we give? I'd be really honest with them, Claire, depending on how much that they've given you. But I'd be really honest and have that really honest conversation with them that due to staff illness, we haven't supported as many, or we might not support as many people as we hoped, but also come with a solution. We're going to increase the marketing that we're doing to try and get more people in at the end of the grant. What are you doing to counteract that? And the number of people that you have had, what are you hoping that will still be able to show them? Because at the end of the day, what they're interested in is the impact of the grant that they've given to you. So if the impact won't change, it's just the volume of people that are coming through. All those people that you're seeing will still go away feeling and had the benefit of why they came to you in the first place. So I would focus on that, but I would absolutely give as much detail as you are allowed to give, what the organisation internally has discussed that they're comfortable with giving away. But I would be as open and honest as you can be, because that's what they will respect, and that's what will help build that relationship over longer term. If they know that you've gone back and been honest with them, they're more likely to go, okay, you handled that, staff illness really well. We knew you had difficulties with the projects, and you've still gone on to, deliver some really good, impactful things at the end of it, even if you haven't done the volume that you said you would. How else can we help and support you? So don't be afraid of being as honest as you are allowed to be, I would say. Right, back to rejection for a moment, but from a different angle. If it feels like nothing is landing for a few months running, we know what it feels like. We've had that really dry spell where we haven't had anything back for a good long time. That's the point where I would step back and have a look at my whole pipeline rather than just kind of picking apart those individual applications. This for me would be about doing a really honest audit of my pipeline. So starting with alignment, be really honest. Are those funders in your pipeline genuinely right for what you're doing now? Or did they go on the list because they fund similar kinds of things and it seemed plausible? We might have been, similar to what's going on. So maybe we could try it. A pipeline full of those plausible but not quite right funders will end up with you getting lots of no's, regardless of how you write. That's just inevitable, isn't it? We know that stat, don't we, of 1 in 10 applications to cold prospects are likely to be successful. We know that. So have a look at your alignment first, then have a look at the warmth of those relationships, everything that we've discussed. How many of your recent applications were from genuinely cold prospects? No prior conversations, no introductions, nothing. We know from that 1 in 10 that warm applications are consistently outperforming cold ones in the sector. So if your pipeline is mostly those cold submissions, then that's worth addressing, not just hoping that things are going to land. Taking some time back from your application writing and looking at your priority trusts and seeing we're really, really well aligned with these. We just need to build that relationship to have a greater chance of being successful. Because when that instinct comes, you're getting loads of no's, so you think I need to put more out there to counteract those no's. That's when we can fall into that volume trap of putting too much out there, which isn't quite the right fit, and then we might not be as aligned as we wanted to be, and so we're going out for those volume fits, which brings the coldness of our pipeline back down again. But look with someone, get someone to look at what you're doing with fresh eyes. When did someone outside your immediate team last read one of your proposals critically? Have you got a friend? Doesn't even have to be connected with the sector, connected into the charity world, that can just have a look at your applications with really fresh eyes. Because we can absolutely become blind to our own writing, can't we? And a fresh read often catches things that could have been invisible to you for weeks, for months. It's always good to get someone periodically to have a look. And then absolutely do those things that we said, look at those unexplored routes in, and see whether there are any ways that you can absolutely warm your portfolio up. Don't just look at your trustees. Trustees are usually the first place that people go, but have a look at your ambassadors, have a look at your long-standing volunteers, anyone that you're connected into in the community, any corporate partners that you work really well with that might be connected to a trust, high sheriffs, that kind of thing, where you've got some really, really good connections and you might not have explored their connections either. You might just have focused on your trust. And then look at timing. Are you applying at a sensible point in their funding cycles? Have a look at when their years run. Have a look at their accounts and see when their years run. If you're applying right at the end of their financial year, then they might not always have any funds to give out by then. So take some of those things into consideration when you're looking at timings as well. So I'm just going to nip back over to the chat. Do people, Fiona says, still send proposals to funders who have no website and only basic info available on Charity Commission? I used to have successes with these in my previous role, but unsure now if many of these don't actually accept unsolicited proposals, even though they don't say it within their accounts. Again, I would have a look, and like Sarah says, after researching as much as possible, see whether you can find a warm way in. If there's a list of trustees, then you might be able to do some research on those individual trustees. Again, have a look for those connections, see if there's a way in. But I would only do that if there's something in that record that makes me feel like we would be aligned. If it's a general charitable purposes organisation that has minimal information in their accounts, doesn't even give a list of grants, you have to seriously look at that and think, is that worth your time going after an organisation like that, when there are potentially better aligned trusts that you can go for in your pipeline, that you can spend the time you might have written to them building those relationships with those better aligned ones. Of course, if you're using a model where you use volunteers to send out those lower level applications, or the ones where you don't know if they're as well aligned, and that might be something you would consider for something like that. But think about how that might bring down your success rates, because you will ultimately get more no's or absolute silence the more volume you're putting out there, but also your average gift values. And those average gift values help you to see how much your pipeline's worth, but also how much you need to get to your target. So if your average gift values are low, you're going to need more to get to your target. So it's a balancing act with trust, isn't it? Always look at priority, alignment, warmth first. And then if you've got some of these lower ones that you're not quite sure what to do with, if you genuinely have the time to go to them and have the time to do that research, then absolutely go there, because you never know where that relationship might take you. I've had some trusts like that have ended up giving us smaller amounts, close, and giving us large grants at the end. So it's all a juggling act. But I would again look at where you're spending your time and see what's the best use of your time to do that. Abigail says, I had zero successes with sending out to funders who have no website in my current role, which I've been in for 3 years. Not sure if it's because we do peace building. Previously, I'd had success with cold asks, but this was for my humanitarian appeals mainly. Absolutely. And if you've moved sectors, it could be as simple as that, that what you're sending just isn't hitting with the particular trusts that are going out there, particularly for ones like that aren't very forward with what they're looking for in those applications. It can be something as simple as that the what you're putting in forward for them just isn't hitting the mark for them. And I just wanted to close today's chat with something that I don't think we talk about enough as trust fundraisers. Trust fundraising absolutely involves more rejection proportionately than any other forms of income generation. If you're working in mid-level giving, major donors, you're not making those asks unless you're pretty sure that that's going to come off, and it's a different conversation to have. Community, you're going out there, some things might be more successful than others, but that's part of the role, isn't it? Legacies, again, that's a long-term thing. We might not see those asks that we've made come off in our lifetimes. And I think because of that rejection side, it can be really isolating, especially if you're a sole fundraiser or in a very small team or working remotely without colleagues who really understand what that run of no's can feel like. So I think for me, resistance isn't pushing through regardless and staying relentlessly upbeat about how you're actually feeling. For me, that feels like suppression, and it tends to catch up with people eventually. Real resilience looks like knowing when to stop. If a significant rejection lands and you need to close the laptop and go for a walk, make yourself a cup of tea, step one in that chart was sit with it, go and do it. The work will still be there when you come back in 10 minutes, half an hour, and there's very little is genuinely lost in taking a step away for your absolutely own sanity. Resilience can look like talking to someone, a colleague, a peer, a mentor, or honestly, in sessions like this, if there's something playing on your mind, getting it out there, that is resilience, being able to talk to people. One of the most reassuring things I hear in this community is that I didn't really realize everyone else found this hard too. We see it a lot in the Trust Fundraising Hub where people shared, have you heard from this? Or we got a rejection, so did we. It's like, oh, it's so great to hear that other people weren't successful too. We celebrate the successes, but we also celebrate that sometimes it's normalizing those small things that are really, really, get us and prick at us and feel like we're doing a bad job, but other people are absolutely in the same boat. And for me, real resilience also means recognizing when peer support isn't enough on its own. If the weight of this work is genuinely affecting your sleep, your health, or your sense of self-worth, that's worth raising with your line manager, having a conversation with your GP or another professional. It's not something to just work through alone. If you're feeling like that, you need a little bit more support that maybe we can give you here. This community exists because this work can be really isolating, and you're very rarely the only one finding it particularly hard, particularly at the moment. So please do bear all of that in mind. Nothing about this has anything to do with you or your self-worth. Rejection is just part and parcel of the trust fundraising world. So let me bring together quickly before we finish exactly what we've covered. Rejection, as we've said, is inevitable. It's not a verdict on your organisation or your own self-worth. How you respond to a no, can really shape the relationship going forward. Taking that time to ask those questions if you can, and to say thank you for being considered is a really good way of slowly warming them up. So always follow up graciously and ask for feedback where that guidance allows. Warming a relationship after a no means networks and genuine engagement, not just putting them on a mailing list, not just sending them things monthly to try and keep that relationship warm. It's doing those really considered pieces of networking and pieces of, this, I thought this would be something that you'd be interested in. Really, really think about what you're sending to them and other ways that you can warm up that relationship. If something's going wrong mid-grant, honesty early is always better than silence later. Really think about how you can be honest with them and let them know the reality of where things are for your project. And then when rejections start to cluster, audit your pipeline, not just that single application. Have a look if there's anything going on in your pipeline that might need adjusting. And then resilience absolutely means looking after yourself, not just pushing through when things get tough. So please, please look after yourselves. Charlotte says, after going through 2 rounds of redundancies while getting rejections by trust, I do stress about the outcome of my job at times. Absolutely. And we all do, don't we? When things are tough and we see those redundancies happening, even if they're not happening to us, it's absolutely worse if they are happening to you. So I'm so sorry you've been through that, Charlotte. Even seeing it happen to our colleagues can make us feel a little bit unsettled, can't it? If we're losing people that we're close to at work and we see people going through that, can absolutely. But please do reach out to people in your community, Charlotte, even if that's not in your charity community, if it's still in your friendship community. None of this is on your shoulders or for you to carry on your own. None of it is for any of us to carry on our own. So please do remember that. So our next Let's Chat will be on the 21st of July at 12 noon, and we will be doing a absolutely straightforward Q&A in July. It's our last Let's Chat before we have a break for the summer in August. We'll be back in September. So if you have any burning trust fundraising questions that you want to bring to the forum, please do come along on the 21st and ask them there. You can submit any questions that you have to me. If you'd rather send them to me privately, please do feel free to do that.